months now, I've been hearing a man's voice in my house and kept dismissing it as something else. I can't count how many times I've asked my husband, "Did you say something?" Only to realize he wasn't talking. The most startling moment happened recently. He was asleep when I walked into our bedroom, and I clearly heard a man ask me for something. Thinking it was him, I responded and ended up waking him instead. It's always the same voice, not different ones. Could my frequency be high enough at times to pick up the astral realm? Is it my dad, my father-in-law, or maybe even a neighbor's spirit checking in? I've heard things like, "You're beautiful. Are you all right? And how are you doing?" But the last time, I couldn't quite make out the full question. About a year ago, I used a divination board I made, along with a ghost communication app, so maybe I unintentionally opened a door. Either way, this is new to me. The presence doesn't feel threatening, and I don't feel scared or uneasy, just curious. Whatever or whoever this is, the energy feels benevolent. Here's your original story, structured into 3 paragraphs of approximately 350 words each for better readability. I've been working in the hospitality/service industry for 7 years, and I just had the weirdest encounter. Weird is an understatement. It was unsettling. Today, I served a woman who looked like she was in her late 20s. She was alone, and at first I thought she was very pretty, classy. I walked up to her and asked if she'd been to the bar before. She said no and asked me for drink recommendations. As I started listing some, she cut me off mid-sentence and told me how adorable and beautiful I was, staring at me intensely, unblinking, pupils super dilated. It was creepy, but I just said thank you. The way she said it felt flirty, which I initially brushed off as her just liking women, but the staring never stopped. Every time I looked over, her eyes locked onto mine, unmoving. Then, mid-conversation, she suddenly asked, "So what do you do?" I was confused and asked what she meant. "For fun?" she clarified. I told her I mostly worked and studied, and she immediately replied, "Don't do that." I laughed nervously and asked, "Why? What do you do?" She stared deep into my eyes, so deep it felt like she was looking in, to my soul, and said, "I do self-care. I'll get back to you on that one." I tried shifting the conversation, asking what kind of alcohol she liked so I could recommend something. She smirked and said, "I like all animals." I froze, confused. Was she joking? But her expression was serious. Maybe she didn't know what I meant by spirit, so I clarified, asking what type of alcohol she preferred. She repeated, "I told you I like everything." I was so uncomfortable, I pointed at a few popular drinks and she responded, "You can give me whatever you want." I took her order and left as fast as I could. I had my coworker bring her drink because I didn't want to go back. My coworker later told me the woman complimented her lips but seemed angry, refusing to make eye contact. That's when it got weird. I had to return to her table later. Again, unwavering eye contact, no blinking. I asked if she wanted another drink, and she said yes. As I served her, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked if she lived in my city. She smiled and said, "I like to live in the moment." I laughed and asked, "So you're from here?" Instead of answering, she lifted her drink and said, "Cheers." She was avoiding the question. At this point, I was beyond creeped out and walked away. Later, when my coworker dropped off her bill, the woman wouldn't even look at her. She would only talk to me. I had to process her payment myself. As I did, I asked, "What are your plans after this?" "Take in. It's almost midnight." She tilted her head and asked, "What are you doing after this?" I laughed nervously. "Well, I have to clean and close," she smiled. "Me too." My stomach dropped. I asked what she did for work, and she replied, "I'll get back to you." It wasn't a joke. It was chilling. After the transaction went through, I asked her name. Again, she smiled and whispered, "I'll get back to you." At that moment, I felt pure fear. Her intense, unblinking stare made me feel like I'd see her again, whether I wanted to or not. As soon as she left, my anxiety skyrocketed. My coworker said they felt chills just being near her. Her energy was off. She had manic, dilated eyes, but didn't seem drunk or high. And then I learned something even stranger. The hostess never saw her come in. She entered through the hotel's employee exit. No one uses that entrance. It's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep. What did I just experience? My mother told me about an incident that happened to her when she was a little girl during the Great Depression. She remembered it all her life, as though it happened yesterday. My great-grandmother lived with my mother and the family then. The town where they lived was mostly farmland, and the railroad that ran through TGS center of town. One day, a boyfriend of one of my mother's aunts, who happened to be a used car salesman, was feeling generous after a big sale and was celebrating with a few drinks. He handed my great-grandmother a $20 bill and told her to go spend it wherever she wanted. Excitedly, my great-grandmother decided to walk to the grocery store about a mile away to get treats for the family. In those days, $20 was like $2,000 to some people. She took my mother's hand, and they walked to the store together. At the store, loitering outside, were two rough-looking men, but they didn't pay much attention to them then. They got their few items, and when my great-grandmother handed the clerk the $20 bill, the two men peered inside and appeared to take notice of the change she was handed. My mother and her grandmother walked out of the store calmly and started home across the fields. It was getting dark by now, and they had only walked a little way down the road when my great-grandmother suddenly looked frightened as she turned around to see a beat-up pickup truck with no headlights on following them. She grabbed my mother into a cornfield and whispered to her to get down as low as she could and to move as quietly and quickly as she could. They both moved deeply into the cornfield, and at one point, my great-grandmother whispered to my mother to lay down on the ground and not make a sound. My mother remembers seeing the light from a lantern or flashlight moving up and down and all around as she heard the cornstalks rustling as the two men kept searching for them. After what seemed like hours to a little girl, my great-grandmother told my mother to get up, and they finished their journey home. In those days, the newspapers and radio often reported being assaulted and sometimes killed for a few dollars or pennies in their pockets. My mother would still shudder and cross herself for so many years when she told this story, thinking about what might have happened to a little girl and her grandmother had those two men found them in that desolate cornfield. When I open the door and see Zach standing there, he doesn't look anything like the broad-shouldered, confident kid I used to know. His thinness is jarring, unhealthy even, and the tattoos, along with the needle marks on his arm, make him an unsettling figure. I invite him in and guide him to the couch. "What brings you here, Zach?" I ask. "What's it been, 15 years since we last saw each other?" "I know, right?" He gives me a half-hearted smile. "Remember when we used to skate near the mall, blasting Green Day and Offspring?" "Yeah, the good old days. I miss not having bills." His eyes drop, as if he's reconsidering what he came to say. "I was glad you added me on Facebook and DM'd me. It's been ages since we lost touch, us and the gang. But the truth is I need to talk to you about that night." My face hardens. "We shouldn't talk about that. We promised never to bring it up." "But Andy," he says, desperation in his eyes, "that night is coming back to us. I started dreaming about it again." "We all do, Zach," I reply, "and there's nothing we can do. We were just dumb kids. We did something wrong, and—" "The guys are gone, Andy," he interrupts. "Jeff, Bob, and Brian disappeared, one by one, over the past few months. Before that, they told me about things they were seeing, something coming for them." That silences me, and Zach leans forward. "There's something coming for us too, Andy. The girl we killed. Oh God, we were so stupid. How could we think it was over?" Zach sobs, and I stand moving closer. "Please, leave now," I say coldly, motioning for him to get up. He heads for the door, his eyes filled with sadness. But he never reaches the handle. I quickly wrap a sharp cord around his neck, and a second later we're struggling on the floor. I'm getting the hang of this. He dies faster than the others. Bob gave me the most trouble. I grab his body and drag it to the backyard where I buried the rest. Night comes, and I hope for peace. They are all gone, like she ordered. I need her to leave me alone now. For months, she comes at night and won't let me sleep. Her shadows move through the door, window, ceiling, and her sharp voice said she'd leave when her vengeance is complete. Now, in the darkness, I hear her moving again, whispering in my ear that the price for redemption was almost paid. Except for one. There's only me left. After I lost weight, men began to notice me and tell me I was beautiful. It was a stark contrast. I thought I looked average and asked my pretty friends about it. They all laughed before they reminisced how I was getting too cocky and should teach them my makeup tips. Then I had an experiment. I went to bars, clubs. It was the same with every man, younger men, older men. But something was strange, I realized. Nights I yapped on, they put a finger to my lips just to look at my face. Some didn't want intercourse unless it was missionary. Eyes less on my body and more on my face. I grew unsettled and asked for advice. My friends laughed, saying I was always going to be popular. My therapist asked if I had body dysmorphia and convinced me I was perfect and how my anxiety was. But I was fine. I was sane. I knew it was them, and I soon wore a face mask and glasses. Still, guys stopped me and asked for my number. The barista gave me a free drink and waved me over to talk. They were all kind to people, and some girls would love to be treated this way, I thought, as I ran away. Back home to be safe, but it was uncanny. It was disgusting. All they cared about was my face, not my personality or stories. They didn't really like me. And one day I went to the plastic surgery center. They showed them a photo of the plainest girl, told them to make my face like hers, and when I took off my mask and the doctor examined my face, he seemed shocked. He stuttered. How I shouldn't waste my face like that. I insisted and offered nearly all my savings. The week of the surgery, I was relieved. Finally, I'll be normal again, I thought. I went to the surgery center. My name was called and I was led into a room injected with something. I relaxed and was numb and my fingers couldn't even move, but it must have been on purpose. I waited to be knocked out, and then a horde of doctors and nurses arrived. The skin will be hard, a nurse was sighing. She's making a good expression at least. We will make tons if we sell this to the ugly women who come. The doctor stepped towards me. I'll be very careful. I couldn't speak, but he seemed to realize my question. It'll be harder, you know, to be faceless than pretty. The crimes were escalating. This would be the third one today. Evan glared out the back window, barely able to contain his excitement. The rain fled across the glass, transforming the trees into a blurry green wall. He shifted in his seat, his fingers twitching. So, you live way out here? The driver asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Yeah, no. It's my grandma's house. Evan stumbled over his lie. He hadn't anticipated small talk. The house was abandoned. Evan had made sure of it. He'd planned his crime meticulously. The location, remote and isolated, was perfect for his needs. The driver nodded and returned to humming, his tone mirroring the low thrum of the engine, as the car shuddered and the driver pulled over onto the shoulder. Flat tire, he announced, frustrated. Of all times. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. Evan seethed, his meticulously crafted plan threatened by a simple flat tire. Irritated, he clenched his jaw. He was ready, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Hey, the driver said, his voice cutting through Evan's rising anger. Would you mind giving me a hand? The request sparked a sudden, brutal clarity in Evan's mind. Why wait? This desolate stretch of road, miles from anywhere, was as good a place as any. The opportunity was presenting itself. Sure, Evan replied, masking a surge of dark anticipation. "Thanks," the driver said. "The spare and tools are in the trunk." Evan moved around the car, his hands slipping into his coat, meeting the cold steel of the knife. A primal struggle ignited, a burst of energy, a surge of fear, the flash of a blade in the dim light, a spray of warm, thick liquid, the sickening thud of a body hitting the rain-soaked asphalt. The driver opened the trunk, lifted Evan's body, and placed it gently beside the two other bodies already cradled within. He was escalating. 3 in one day. I have been a newspaper delivery substitute for over 2 years now. My route is not very long. I am usually busy for 2 hours. We live in a very rural area surrounded by mountains and wooded hillsides. Some houses are built right at the tree line. Wild animals are surprisingly rare here, though I have seen some deer in the woods. Pets are much more common. There are a lot of cats, which is probably why I was not really bothered when these things started happening. Half a year ago, I was distributing the newspaper as always. I reached the last street on my route. 5 houses in one line. The first 3 were pretty new, the 4th was an old shag, awe-end by an old man, and the last one was a holiday home, usually empty when I was there. When I reached house 2 that day, I was shocked. A dead bird had been left beneath the mailbox. I quickly brushed it off as a cat's prey. Nothing bad, nothing scary, but the bird was not cleaned up. Its corpse stayed on the ground, slowly decaying more and more. I felt sorry for the bird, and grossed out. I did not want to touch it. I thought that was the reason the bird was still there. No one wanted to clean it up. Eventually, I became numb to it. Now, only a few weeks ago, I was once again in that street finishing my tour as I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. A fish was lying in the driveway of the old shag. Okay, I thought. Nothing strange. There is a river nearby, an animal caught it, dragged it up here and left it. Plausible solution. Except that the fish was lying perfectly vertical, as if it had been placed there, and its lower half was missing. Just gone. With a clean cut. Teeth could not do that. But a knife could, so a human must have placed the fish there. Okay, I thought, never mind. I'll mind my own business. I went home and took a shower. Only then did I notice that the fish did not smell bad. On a warm day like this, the fish would have started to rot way too soon. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that the fish must have been placed there only minutes before I had entered the street. I closed my curtains tightly that night. It began to give me the creeps. But I kept doing the job. My rational mind kept telling me that everything had a logical explanation, and I was just too scared to see it. Besides, I needed the money. Today, I made my rounds again. The road was quiet. No dead animals. Nothing. That wasn't until I climbed the stairs to the whole day home. I put a newspaper into the mailbox and turned around, my gaze washing over the trees. Fear sank into my stomach like a stone. In a tree, not more than 10 feet from me, a deer's head hung from a branch. The flesh had rotted away, leaving nothing but pale bones. My ragged breathing was the only sound. Every bird, every animal, even the wind had stopped. The empty eyes of the deer's head seemed to dig into my head, my thoughts, deeper and deeper until they seemed to see everything of me. Everything I ever was. Everything I'll ever be. The sound of breaking wood filled my ears, and the skull fell to the ground. Its magic was broken. I ran home, closed the curtains, and covered myself with a blanket, shivering under the sheet. My sweaty hair clung to my body, and my dirty clothes were far too warm. I tried to breathe. Its eyes were still in my head, and every thought seemed to be watched by them. It took hours before I could move again. I have a feeling that something not natural is happening, something horrible. I don't want to go back there. I want to keep my curtains closed forever, but I cannot forget those eyes. I am scared, so scared.